Hello, everybody, and welcome to Inclusivity in Gaming, Autism Spectrum Disorders in your game and at your friendly local game store. So I'm going to go ahead and start to introduce the panel, then cover a couple of little, I won't really say ground rules, but just what our whole purpose is today and what it is that we're aiming to do. So hello, I'm Jack Berkenstock. I am a master's level therapist who is also executive director and one of the founders and one of the principal therapists of the Bodhana Group. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We operate out of York County, Pennsylvania, and serve a whole bunch of different locations. We offer services ranging from consultation, private paid groups that we run for agencies for various populations. And we also run a annual convention called Civ Against Fear in October, which funds a lot of our endeavors. Yeah, I see a couple of Save shirts. That's pretty flattering, right? We bring our own people. We're gonna go ahead and introduce the rest of the panel.
Intentionality. My name is Jared Ebert. I'm also a master's level clinician. I'm also a founding member of the Bodhana Group. The whole thrust behind kind of what we're doing here today is to talk about how we can make our games and our gaming environments more inclusive for everybody, but specifically focusing on autism spectrum disorders today.
James Kirk, that's my actual name. I'm a volunteer game master for the Bodhana Group, help with some of the background stuff, all around great guy. I also am the co-host with Jack on a show that we do called Gaming with Intention. It's actually the Bodhana Cast Gaming with Intention, the full name, I want to get that right on YouTube. I provide background comedy.
All right.
I'm Jen. I'm a co-founder and administrative manager of the Bodhana Group, and I do a lot more with board game groups and modifications for the audience that we're serving, and all kinds from after-school programs to elderly homes, hospitals, that kind of thing.
I'm Adam Johns. I'm one of the two executive directors of Game to Grow. We're a nonprofit based in the Seattle area that uses games of all kinds for therapeutic, educational, community growth. And primarily what we do is we use Dungeons & Dragons to build social skills, so very similar to the work that's been done by the Bodhana Group here locally. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. I guess that's good to say. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist, specializing in mostly seeing geeks and gamers in therapy, in addition to the work I do with Game to Grow.
My name is Adam Davis. I'm sometimes known as the other Adam, and the other executive director of Game to Grow, and I have a master's in education with a specialization in drama therapy.
Can you guys hear from these two mics? Is it doing anything on these two mics? Okay, cool.
It is, okay.
Good. All right.
I actually have a real quick question just to start. How many of you game regularly at a game store of some type, like a brick and mortar place that you go to for events, things like that? Okay, some of you. How many of you own stores or work in stores that do that? 2 people.
Right. 3? Okay, we got 3. All right,
She saw the other 2 hands go up, and then she was like, all right. Really? Hopefully after we're done today and we've talked about this stuff, it kind of energizes you to get out of your house.
Go to a game store,
gamers,
folks.
they're out there. And support your local game stores, because really, that's where this all started. And even though we've brought it to our homes and other places, support these places that are out there offering, these types of events and programs and things that you can do to enjoy yourself for a couple of hours and meet new people.
So our focus today, first we're always going to kind of get straight out of the gate. We thought long and hard about what our focus was going to be, because this is actually a training that we offer at college campuses, slightly altered for today. We offer this for different agencies. We offer it for game stores, people who work in game stores. We have a couple of different things that we're going to go into and some stuff that we're definitely not going to go into. So we are going to talk a little bit about autism spectrum disorders for those of you who may not be aware, but our goal is not to provide a training to you. We are not training you to go into a facility or into a person's house to be able to support that person one-to-one or advise a family. We're going to kind of demystify autism. You know, there's a lot that you might see on, in different media sources or, through persons that you talk to who, might have family members or such. So our goal is to kind of break down in very simple terms what a person with autism might experience, what their life might be. And then we're going to kind of extrapolate from that to say, okay, well, how can gaming help? And then how can we, as gamers, be more accommodating to folks who are on the spectrum or experience challenges through autism? How can we help and be, better neighbors, better fellow gamers? So our overall goal is educating while enlightening, becoming more aware, learn how to be a resource, make gaming truly an inclusive hobby, because one of the things we call this training is everybody plays. We actually have plans to take this training and actually apply to other things such as gender fluidity and gender identity issues, or folks who are suffering from social anxiety or depression. Let's learn how to be less judgmental and more supportive. So,
Hey, yes, woo.
all right.
That's right.
All right.
Woo that.
How many of you have ever been in a gaming group or been playing a game and felt like you were excluded from the other people at the table? Felt like you weren't part of that group? That's
Jared-
no fun, right?
Jared does it to me all the time.
It's very
really
purposeful.
Overall, it's...
See, we're even working on ourselves on this.
So the goal here is not to fix anything. And one of the main things I want to get across when we're talking about folks with autism spectrum disorders, and we'll talk a little bit about what specifically that means, is that there's nothing wrong with these individuals. The autism community overall does not view their diagnosis as a deficit in a lot of cases. So we're not trying to fix this. We're not trying to help anybody. We're trying to make sure that what we do doesn't hurt anybody. And we're trying to make sure that everyone gets an even chance to be part of everything going on at a game store, or in your own home, or in your own gaming group, whatever it might be. Because everybody's got little inclusivity needs here and there. And some of us can just step past them. But overall, if we were able to go into an environment and there'd be no gatekeeping, think how awesome that would be and how welcoming and how much we want to be in that place. And that's what we're really going for here.
And just like on a personal note for me, because I have a very passionate thing for this, my daughter is on the spectrum. She's borderline, but she's a completely normal kid in most respects. She has some issues with loud noises. If she was in this room, she would find it very unacceptable. But she's able to express those kinds of things. She's not, a jerk about it. And she really, for the most part, like everybody that meets her immediately like gives some of their heart to that kid. 'Cause she's that kind of person. She's the brightest light that I know, So being able to teach people how to interact with, folks that are on that spectrum and understand that they're just people.
Yeah. We fear what we don't know in a lot of cases. And so kind of getting rid of that fear is what we're all about. So, autism spectrum disorders. Do you guys want to dive in? You work with a lot of folks
Sure.
on the spectrum. I know you do.
So a lot of the work that we do with Game to Grow is oriented towards challenges related to autism spectrum. One of the biggest challenges in working with autism spectrum is that it really is a very wide variety of issues and challenges that come up that exhibit themselves in a way that can be very hard to define and very hard to narrow down. To that end, we actually don't require any kind of diagnosis. Many of our players don't have a diagnosis on the autism spectrum. Many of them have challenges more similar to ADHD or social anxiety, and many of them also have shared challenges that you might see with autism spectrum disorders. So one of the most important things to keep in mind, and I think we're going to address this a little bit more as we get further down, is really just this idea that it's a really, really wide spectrum, and the particular challenges of any one individual are going to look very different from another individual, even who maintains and who has a diagnosis on the autism spectrum.
Yeah, the thing in the field is if you've met one person with autism, congratulations, you've met one person with autism. It's not something that you can say, well, that person doesn't like loud noises, therefore this person has the same diagnosis. If they don't have a problem with that, then they're faking it. That's not at all what this means. It's a very wide spectrum. But overall, we're talking about those difficulties with communication, with social interaction, and sometimes with some repetitive behaviors that are referred to in the field as these stereotypic behaviors. And if you've known someone with autism, one of the key points that goes into a lot of folks' difficulties comes down to these restrictive or fixated interests. The stereotypical one is this person only wants to talk about trains, and they know more about trains than any person you've ever met in your entire life. And in that way, they're a lot kind of like Olympic athletes. Like if you're a sprinter in the Olympics, you're awesome at that. You run short distances very quickly, and that's what you spent your entire life doing. You put that person in a powerlifting competition, they are toast. There's no chance whatsoever. That's not what they trained for. Same thing with these folks with these fixated interests. They're really, really good in that area. You take them out of that area, they get uncomfortable very quickly, and so they tend to want to go back into that area.
Would you say that's what they trained for?
If we want to talk about researching and looking at something and spending all your time reading about it, sure.
Trains is actually a really interesting example because it comes up so much.
I didn't even try, the pun wasn't intended.
Trains is like a really interesting example within the autism spectrum community that it just comes up a lot. A train is a very common interest for many individuals on the spectrum.
And again, just kind of going back to, a point that we're resounding, over and over again, we're saying this, and there's a reason that when we say about autism spectrum disorders, we call it a spectrum partially because everyone experiences it differently. The possibilities, the variations, literally these are infinite. So here, again, are a couple of examples of some persons that we see and recognize from media. I would say probably kind of like the Neil Armstrong on the moon kind of version of, branching out to autism would probably have been Rain Man, played by Dustin Hoffman in 1988. Most people came away from that movie going, I got it, that's autism. In that one example it was, and then we have Max in the middle there, who actually most people say is a pretty accurate reflection of a young man on the spectrum. And then some people have said Grissom with his bug interest kind of falls somewhere in the Asperger's range. As we're going to kind of talk about, maybe. But like, the Adams had said already, the diagnosis isn't really the important piece. It's really how it affects a person. So going to some of the examples we kind of talked about, social skills is probably one of the most common referred to areas of the autism spectrum that people think like that's the thing. Like if you're on the autism spectrum, that's your issue, that's your challenge.
I'm just now realizing I think everybody on the IT crowd has some level of social skills.
How dare you! A couple IT crowd fans in the audience.
Yeah, like two.
Yeah,
so the major thing that goes on here, we're talking about social skills. We've got to understand that social skills are how we interact with literally everything around us. It is the prism through which we can see and touch and discuss with our world and connect with others. It is literally physically impossible for two people to be in the same space and not communicate with each other. Even if I'm not talking to you, the way I'm not talking to you tells you something about what's going on in my mind and how I feel about you. That's a huge thing. And to not be able to read that kind of social blindness that occurs with a lot of folks with autism, makes the world seem like a very random and terrifying place. And so a lot of the behavioral difficulties, a lot of the problems that folks on the spectrum experience come down to a fear-based reaction to what's going on around them and just trying to interpret what's happening. And we'll talk about the nonverbal communication again, but a lot of communication is nonverbal. And if we think about relationships are everything about how we do everything in the world. I mean, me trying to go and get my oil changed in my car involves me, forming a relationship with somebody long enough to hand them my credit card and have them change my oil. But that's a difficult thing for a lot of folks on the spectrum.
Another thing that's important to recognize here is that even though oftentimes there are deficits in social skills, that doesn't mean there's not a desire to connect. And that's an important thing to remember as a facilitator of someone who sees a lot of kids who are struggling to connect, and sometimes they have struggled so much that they internalize that into a sense of I'm bad at this and I'm a failure. And that doesn't mean, even if they stop trying, it doesn't mean necessarily that they don't want to have that connection. It's made with other people.
Yeah. And to add to that, there's also sometimes a tendency to overcompensate then, because you want so badly to be able to talk to somebody that you want them to understand you, and then it just comes across as like, okay, you're trying too hard, that sort of thing. But that's, for them, they really are trying because they want to have that connection or that communication with the people around them. It's just it's an awkwardness as to how to reach it.
Absolutely.
All right. So we had kind of referenced a little bit earlier the fact that, it's all about communication. One of the amazing kind of statistics that most people don't really acknowledge or think about, because we rarely talk about this, is the fact of, as we see here, 93% of all communication is primarily nonverbal. So we have 55% is body language, and that's how we're sitting, how we're standing, how, we walk across a room, what type of eye contact we're maintaining. Even the sag or the lift in our shoulders tells another person a huge amount of where we're at that moment and what we're feeling, or, how, if I go ahead and make a bad joke, trust me, I know what I'm talking about with this example. I can recognize oh yeah, that one wasn't the right punchline to go with.
This is my favorite part.
Oh, no.
Because everybody in the room just checked their posture. Am I sitting normally? Is it weird?
I don't want to make this guy feel uncomfortable.
Like Drax slowly. It's completely imperceptible.
So that piece about body language, and again, there are even parts to our body language that we ourselves are not consciously or directly aware of. Things of the arch of our eyebrow. Okay, there are, I'm fuzzy at the moment on the various number of indicators that we have on our face, but I think it's anywhere between like 26 to 40 different facial indicators, whether it's like, how our eyes are open or closed, or the curve of our mouth. All of these things we kind of learn over time, because even on a simpler level, there are basic markers for humans and how we interact with each other. But getting even further, though, we've all developed our own individual tics and markers. This is a confusing game to play, because now not only do I have to learn your general rules, but now I have to learn the more specific avenues of you versus you. Versus you. Well, okay, maybe you like jokes that are a little kind of risque. Maybe no, don't go there. But I don't know that just by looking at you. And maybe when I start the joke, if I have this, I can't really read and pick up on your uncomfortable squirm, I'm going to keep, so yeah, then the black guy, and again, I'm using a purposeful example. All right, good job.
Thanks.
But you see the example that we're getting at, and then people run into a lot of these kind of social isolation situations, and people run into these uncomfortables. Now, just for a moment, so we can kind of, stretch back to this later, think of the kind of things that are said during a game. Some of the off-color humor, some of the jokes, some of the, like, I did this with my character. Now, we're starting to get a lot more savvy to this now with the whole idea of like veils and lines, right? No, thank you, Evil, introducing the I'm not comfortable with this. But if I don't recognize that other people are getting uncomfortable, I might make more of those errors. And that's just body language.
Well, let's talk about it. Have you ever walked into a room where two people just had an argument and you didn't even hear the argument, but you can tell that there was just this huge issue? If you can't read that and you walk into that situation and say the wrong thing, you've just put yourself in a very dangerous situation and might have difficulty with that relationship. And that's the kind of blindness that we're talking about with a lot of these folks. And then we're also talking about a piece here where Jack alluded to rules, and this is very important because we have so many rules and they change constantly. So we all learned, if you meet somebody for the first time, you introduce yourself, you put your hand out, you shake their hand, right? Does that work if we're in the bathroom together and I'm using the urinal next to you?
No.
No was the correct answer, I'm sorry.
For guys in the room, what are the rules as far as which urinal you use in the bathroom?
Ooh. Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
What was that? Yes, at least one between you, right? And eye contact is not allowed. You look straight forward, you can look down, you can look up, but never left or right.
Hey, how's it coming? Steady stream today, buddy?
It's virtually the same thing in a movie theater when like 3 or 4 guys get movie tickets
Oh yeah, it's all
together.
separate out.
There's
So,
a gash.
who taught you that? At what point did somebody pull you aside and say, hey, you don't go to the urinal next to that guy? Huh?
That weird look you got as a kid.
Exactly. It was all nonverbal. But we all understand the code when it comes to bathrooms. You don't speak, you don't make eye contact, you do what you need to do, you get out, we'll have a conversation later. Now, I don't know this for sure, but I understand that for the ladies, this is a completely different experience as far as how bathrooms work.
Yeah, we're not going to mansplain
No,
ladies with etiquette.
no idea. I'm
That's-
not
yeah.
going to go there.
No.
But you know, it's just very.
You want to take this?
Would you like to speak for all of you?
No, I want to know why there's
that's its
furniture in
whole-
there.
For our own stall, we have a door, we're happy. We don't need much interaction.
Remember, we can't go to the bathroom alone, so the furniture is for the one who
It's-
doesn't actually
Yeah,
go to
right.
the bathroom with that wet whip.
It all makes
The guard,
sense.
as it
All
were.
right. Wow, actually, that explains it perfectly.
so I
You
bring
wanna
this up.
get into why women have to go to the bathroom in groups?
That's
a whole
other panel.
Okay.
But the reason I bring this up is this is something we can all relate to, that is something that we learned. It's a very strict codified set of rules that no one ever actually told anybody else, but we all know it. And if you don't get that, if I've learned how to interact in situation A, and I walk into the bathroom and I use I'm taught in school, you fill in the next seat, right? You don't go sit somewhere else, you fill in the next seat, so the next urinal's open, I go stand there, and I'm supposed to make eye contact and introduce myself, so I look over and go, "Hi, I'm Jared. How are you today? Everything all right?" People run screaming, and then you're isolated, and then you're that weird kid. And that weird kid thing persists throughout life into kind of everything else you do and causes major, major difficulties, and this isolation is huge.
Well, especially if no one's explained what you did wrong.
Yeah.
A lot of times you get into a situation and you know something's wrong, but you don't know where it went wrong. And if no one's willing to kind of teach you that or get you to understand, you're going to continue to be afraid of situations because you don't know when you're going to do something wrong because you don't know what's wrong. So communication, again, back and forth, like it's okay to say, this is what happened.
Yeah.
This is in this scenario.
I used to, way back before my days with Game to Grow, I did some individual coaching for individuals on the autism spectrum, and they were specifically skills coaching. One of the skills that we worked on was eye contact. And I had a lot of conversations with individuals on the autism spectrum about eye contact, and how much eye contact, and how little eye contact. And as I was trying to explain eye contact, I realized I don't know how to do eye contact either. I'm doing it, but I don't know how I'm doing it.
It's a rule, right?
It's a rule. And at some point in my growing up, I watched other people and I learned from their behavior, this is how you do this. And there's all sorts of pieces to it. You make eye contact, I make eye contact when I'm talking with somebody. But I don't have to make eye contact the entire time. I can go back and forth between making eye contact and not making eye contact and have that be a perfectly comfortable situation. And I want to make eye contact, but I don't want to make too much eye contact because that's a whole nother
Don't make it
different
weird.
definition.
Yeah.
Frankly, it became impossible to try to explain this one very simple thing that I've been doing my entire life that this individual, this client, couldn't understand. And it was very, very hard to explain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, going a little further through this, I mean, again, we're going to kind of move closer to some of the suggestions, some of the ways you can augment this. When we talk now about semi-verbal is, our intonation. It's yeah, we said something, but it's kind of like it's the way I said it. There, whatever emphasis we put on which syllable to be able to kind of deliver. Thank you. All right, a Mike Myers reference. But the idea of where the emphasis on certain things goes, it's another way that we put emotionality into an emotion and feeling into what we say. That is another piece of this puzzle of nonverbal communication that sometimes can get missed. And again, the biggest high point to all this is that when we talked earlier about the importance of relationships, number one difficulty for someone with ASD, and we're going to find this not just with persons on the autism spectrum, anyone who has a mental health diagnosis, a behavioral challenge, any type of, even chronic medical conditions, okay? Number one difficulty with those folks is the isolation that they feel as a result of the diagnosis. People, oh man, kids are mean. Yeah, you're dang right, kids can be mean.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah, that's a callback to anyone in the earlier panel, thank you. All right, it's reruns. David Pataniak says loneliness is the only real disability. And part of this, is this kind of see something, say something mentality that we're getting to as a culture, which is very encouraging. If you see something, someone mistreating another person, if you see someone being exclusive to someone, let's bring that up. Let's talk about that. Because there's a couple of things about loneliness that it's not just the fact that I'm all alone and I don't feel like I have any friends. It's the idea that when a person has social isolation, they literally have lost the greatest possible tool to learning social engagement. It's like we've closed the playground down, so we can't play anymore. Because I need to learn from other people, but if other people get too frustrated with me, then they don't want to talk to me, so now I'm not talking to someone, so I can't learn how to talk to someone. It's a very vicious cycle that, in some cases, there's actually a very weird kind of situation. So teenagers who are on the autism spectrum, mostly Asperger's range, a lot of these folks actually get into legal trouble for inappropriate behaviors within the context of relationships. And let's just think about it for a sec. We were talking about basic eye contact. Now just think in your head, and I can guarantee in this room I probably have about 20 different answers to this, about what the correct age is to start having sex, or when you know your partner is into it. Kind of find that out over time, right? So let's really look at what this is all setting up. So just briefly, the goal in any of this should be inclusivity. So kind of talk about the last, and you actually kind of covered a lot of this earlier with some of the restrictive or repetitive, right?
Yeah, I think we're halfway through.
Okay. Yeah, we're about halfway
We talked
through
about the restrictive, repetitive behaviors. The really big thing that I wanted to talk about briefly, and this gets a little clinical, so bear with me, is this idea of theory of mind, which, if you have a minute, go online, Google the Sally Ann test. That's the kind of real basic thing that we do to figure out if somebody's got this idea of theory of mind. But it's the idea that I can know something and you can know something, and they can be different things, and I don't know what you know, and you don't know what I know. So the issue that we run into with this restrictive insistence on sameness that we have is that we're trying to create predictability. And the problem is, if I don't have this theory of mind, if I can't figure out that because I know something, it doesn't mean you know it, is if I go home and dad says, hey, we're gonna have pizza tonight, and I get really excited about that, but mom and dad didn't talk, and mom says, got spaghetti that's gonna be on the stove and we're gonna start eating that, I freak out. Because why did mom lie to me and say she was making spaghetti? I was already told there was gonna be pizza. So I assume that everybody knows what I know, everyone cares about what I care about, and everybody has the same interaction, because I don't get the concept that you're a separate person with separate stuff going on. And that's the real crux of a lot of things that come into difficulty with autism spectrum disorders.
It's actually really important to point out, we're not born with theory of mind skills.
Yep.
They develop over time. Babies don't have any idea that you don't know exactly what they know, which is one of the biggest challenges. When you have a baby, they cry, and then when you don't give them what they want, what they need, they cry harder. Because they say, you obviously know what I need and what I want, obviously, because you know all the things that I know, and that's all you know, and therefore, why aren't you giving it to me? And so it's assumed that it's a conscious choice or a purposeful choice that you have. And what's interesting is we actually continue to develop theory of mind skills throughout our entire lives. When that person cuts you off in traffic and you yell at them and assume they're such a jerk, but they go, I'm on my way to work and I'm late. And of course I need to cut into this lane because I need to take a left up here. Yeah. Those are all also theory of mind skills. That person who cuts you off assumes that you know that they are late. And that when they cut you off, you assume that they know that they're being a jerk. Or maybe they don't know. But
well, and this is the foundation of empathy. The ability to understand how somebody else might feel in a given situation. And having an inability to process empathy in a way that makes sense is the crux of a lot of what we're talking about here.
Now, lest we make everything seem all kinds of negative, where we're talking about problems, there are a ton of strengths that we've identified, and there's a lot more than what is on this slide. We just want to give you kind of an idea of if we think about what we've just kind of talked about, and how some of those things could be seen as deficits or, gaps. How some of those things in different situations, as we said, every situation changes based upon, what the situation is. There are a lot of strengths that we identify with people who are on the autism spectrum. Not going to read through these kind of, here and there, because we want to get kind of into the main meat and potatoes, right? So, biggest question, how can you tell if someone in your game has an autism spectrum disorder?
No.
Yes, James?
You can't.
Good job. Here, have a wristband.
All right. No, seriously, you can't. You can't look at someone and go, autism. Right? I know everybody's
you
laughing
can, but you're kind of a
uncomfortably.
jerk.
If you can, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
If you can do that, you're going to need to talk to us afterwards because we're going to make so much money. It's, to be able to go, yes, no, that,
All right, send in the next line. But this shouldn't be a problem, because when we really get down to it, there are basic rules to being a human that we should be following as much as possible. And some of these basic rules that we have here is, the way you treat somebody, regardless of what their disability or their disorder or their challenge or their issue or whatever buzzword you want to use for it, that person is still a person. And we should be treating people as unilaterally as possible, treating people as similarly as we can. Now, there are some exceptions to how we engage with people based on how they're acting. I mean, again, autism spectrum or whatever, it's not an excuse for dangerous behavior to go, well, okay, I have autism, so I guess you can keep punching me. There are limits, okay? No, that actually was some advice given by some people in certain schools that I've encountered where they say, well, this person, this is their D-stim. Hitting me? Yeah, it's making them feel better. Well, I'm not too happy about it. Well, you can't interrupt that. What?
Yeah.
Why? That's insane. So how's this person going to learn that hitting isn't okay? So the next time your change is wrong at Roy Rogers, wow. Does Roy Rogers still exist? It's a chain.
Yeah.
Never mind. So, as with anyone else, all right, two people. Even Dave wowed me.
yeah.
So be respectful, be compassionate, be kind. And here's.
I
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
was just going to add one extra thing. There's a wide divide in the autism community about how somebody with autism wants to identify themselves.
Sure.
And it's worthwhile to point out, if somebody says, I have autism or I am autistic, the way that they want to identify is important to pay respects to that. And it's worthwhile sometimes to ask. If somebody says like, oh, I was diagnosed with autism, you can say, do you prefer to be referred to as autistic, or do you prefer to be referred to as a person with autism? And it's an identity thing. There are some people who want to own that identity, who want to say that's a part of who I am, it's a part of the things that make up who I am, and so I want to own that and say I am a person who is autistic. And then there are other people who say it's not the identity that I want to maintain, and it's not the way in which I want to identify myself. I'm a person with autism. Like I said, it's a divide. There's no consensus that this one way is the best way to do that. But individuals with autism have strong feelings about how they are being identified through that disorder.
And it's also important to note that there is a big controversy in the community right now over the foundation of Autism Speaks, specifically because Autism Speaks has said that their goal is to cure autism. And that would be like someone telling me they want to cure me of having a beard.
Or cure.
No.
I love the volunteers for this thing.
Yeah, people just
cured
want to
Jack
shave
of-
you, Jared.
Or cure Jack of 80s references.
Of 80s references, yeah.
that's-
Not going to happen. That's in my DNA.
So it's so very important that, someone could identify as having autism and say that they don't want anything to do with it, they want to move past it, they don't want to discuss it, they don't want to talk about it, and somebody else, want to have that as the cornerstone of who they are and talk about it a lot. But we're never going to talk about curing someone of their autism, if indeed that is even something that can happen. It's just not a socially conscious way to talk to people.
So I mentioned a little bit just a slide ago about the fact that, occasionally some behaviors that people may engage in may cause conflict. Now, the first thing that we'll kind of say as a general rule we've learned doing therapy is conflict's okay. conflict is not something that we have to, cushion the universe for someone or try to avoid all conflict. Conflict's how we learn. Conflict is setting boundaries. Conflict is telling someone they crossed your boundary. Conflict's okay. But there's a couple of general rules about managing conflict. We share this as we do. Remain calm. You're never going to make a conflict situation better or easier by getting emotional or out of hand. You want to try to maintain the calm of the entire room. Like Jared said it earlier, if you walk into that room where that argument just happened, you can sense that emotional fallout that's there. So don't add to it, and that will help us kind of calm it down as quick as we can.
Also, the number one rule about someone being in crisis or being upset is to never, ever, under any circumstances, ever say the words, calm down. In the history of the world, no one has ever been freaking out, and someone said to them, calm down, and they went, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Well,
that's a really good point. I should just calm down. And what you're essentially doing is telling someone not to be how they are, telling someone to not experience the emotion that they're experiencing. Yeah. So instead of telling them to negate something, a good way to handle situations like that is to give them something else to do. Like, why don't we have a seat? Why don't we go for a walk? Would it be best for us to take a break at this point? Giving something to do as opposed to something not to do can be really helpful in those kinds of situations.
Yeah. And we're going to talk in a little bit about some of the conflicts that may erupt around the board game or role-playing game table because, as we could probably say automatically, are there conflicts at a gaming table? We're not just sitting around holding hands singing Kumbaya while we roll dice, right?
That's exactly what I thought we were doing.
Oh.
What role-playing game are you playing?
Apparently not the right one.
The role-playing game.
To this day, there are friends that I will not play Munchkin with, lest we not be friends anymore.
Oh, not
Right?
just us?
Yes,
All right.
Everyone's got that.
Wait, we got a hand in the back. Is that him? Is it you? What did you do to Jared? So, the simplest question is, why do people act in a way that might okay, I all of a sudden lost, there we go. So why does a person act the way that they do? Okay, he had yellow eyes. It's all about the trigger. There are reasons we do what we do, and even, no matter what the diagnosis is, no matter what the disability, there are triggers. No behavior happens out of nowhere. Every behavior has a reason and a purpose. Otherwise, we wouldn't invest the energy into engaging in the behavior. So just to kind of throw out, what do you think are some of the most common conflicts that we might see in a gaming environment?
Panel.
Players trying to stab each other.
What? What game are you playing?
Characters.
Oh,
trying to stab each
characters.
other.
Okay.
Characters.
I was
We
like,
went over this in the
Knife
last
Fight, the RPG.
Yeah.
You guys were worried about what game I was playing.
We've got some folks in the audience that have some stuff.
Oh,
Like a misunderstanding of the rules, like.
wait. So you're telling me, like in the 129-page Gloomhaven rulebook, that everything is not 100% crystal clear?
It's 52 pages.
Wait, what do you... See, conflict.
The large
Oh!
already making fun of Jack.
No, but perfectly good example. Rules clarifications.
Suddenly remembering rules.
When they're beneficial, right?
Okay.
A lot of times it's also making up rules that are beneficial to them and not to the other players.
Sure.
Who in the room, by an honest show of hands, actually plays Monopoly the way it's supposed to be played?
By not playing it.
You dirty purists.
Sitting on Baltic with Craig. Monopoly, just as an aside, was designed to be terrible and no fun. It was designed to, explain the sadness of capitalism and how one person gets the start at the beginning and everyone else falls apart.
For the
as
whole
they fail.
family.
And yeah, that's why it's not.
So I noted that a lot of people mentioned in the audience that there were issues regarding around rules or remembering rules or different rules. Anything about interpersonal communication? Maybe some type of characters or people are playing characters and something happens.
In co-op games.
Co-op games, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Somebody playing a completely different game than everyone else there.
We're in a fight. I'm gonna go loot this warehouse.
I actually think we call that game parenting.
I'm not good at that game.
That's it. No.
How about the one player who plays a dark, brooding character and refuses to go along with the rest of the campaign?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a valid character.
Sure.
No, it is.
There are consequences for, like, if you say, I'm going to go off and explore this thing and leave the team behind, that you play that out in story. Is that generally a terrible thing?
Now,
Jen,
now
which
note
kind
it-
of character do you play?
Every time we play Call of Cthulhu, they're like, what do you want to do? It's like, I want to go to the caves. And they're like, come on. And I was like, I'm telling you, there's stuff in the caves.
I want to sit still and explore nothing.
So the reason James and I are laughing as uproariously as we are is I don't even know what uproariously is, but we one of the games that we run, it's a 16-person D&D group.
It's about
that
to
we
be
run.
16, yeah.
It's about to be. Whew. When we started the adventure, it was a lot of people who had never really played role-playing games before, and this was their first kind of foray into learning, social skills and, learning to adapt to independence and things like that. And it was funny that we did our standard, like, yeah, you're in a tavern, blah, blah, blah. Literally, every player was, well, I'm sitting in the back of the shadows, so I don't attract attention to myself. So this led us to be like, okay, let's look at what this really looks like.
First of all, Jack brings me on board to help write the story for this, and he's like, here's the list of characters, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, rogue assassin, rogue assassin, rogue assassin, rogue assassin.
Murder.
Half vampire. I flip over the next one. Somebody's playing a drider. You let someone play a half spider person?
Yes, and.
What am I supposed to do with it? So yeah, when we got them into the tavern, every single one of them I am in the shadows. Okay, great. And that was the first person. Like, what about you? What do you do? I am also in the shadows. And by the fourth person, I looked at the table and I said, okay, guys. We're running out of shadows.
You just turn the lights
It's
off
a really
at that
dark.
point.
It's a really dark tavern. I think.
That's one uncomfortable corner.
Yeah,
Wait.
it was.
There's one corner booth that is all shadows, and they're all in that corner booth. They're all hanging out there together.
In the shadows.
Are you guys
I'm
gonna
not
drink
even kidding.
anything
That's
but
exactly what
coffee?
happened.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost every one of them to a T was like, I'm sitting in the shadows. I'm like, great. All of you realize that you're mostly sitting at the same table in the corner.
I actually had a player on my game who got really upset and had a meltdown because other players weren't following, I guess, what he perceived to be the optimal way to battle.
Sure.
And taking his character out.
Yeah.
And yeah, he had a meltdown. Apparently this happened a lot with this player in the game store with every DM that they worked with. And I felt really bad because other players didn't want to play with them anymore because of the meltdown. And apparently that was also happening with every other group in the store. And the store owner was really struggling with how do you handle this because he keeps having the meltdowns.
Yeah.
And they don't want to exclude him. They want him to play, but then no one else, the other players were getting uncomfortable playing with him because he would get the meltdown over and over and over again because people didn't play the way he thought they were supposed to play. He would end up always being the one dying because of it.
Yeah.
Was this a meltdown over the strategy of approaching a combat?
Yeah, basically,
or?
so they would be the player that would say, oh no, you shouldn't do that, you should do this instead. And then the player obviously wouldn't want other players wanting to play the way they played. And then invariably, that player's, the person on the spectrum, their player character would always be the one end up paying the price for other players not playing the way they were supposed to, quote unquote. And then that would lead to the meltdown because he just keeps saying, I always die, you don't play the right way, and he has a meltdown.
Yeah.
And we struggled to try to figure out how to handle it, what we do with it. And I didn't even know this, my son's on the spectrum as well, and he doesn't play games, so I don't know, I have no experience whatsoever in how to handle this kind of situation, and none of us can figure out what we can do to alleviate it and get it included again.
So the first place we start is with empathy. So how many of you have watched somebody else play Mario for the first time? How many of you, it took every fiber of your being not to strangle that person with the controller?
That might have actually just triggered me.
I just sat here and went, just run across the screen and jump on the turtle, jump on the turtle.
Not there.
When you know how something is supposed to go, and other people aren't doing it right, and it's making what you want to have happen not happen, and it becomes boring and repetitive and angering, and then again, take away some theory of mind. So I don't understand that you don't know what I know, and I'm seeing something coming plain as day, and we're all going to lose, but you're not listening to me. That's really frustrating for that person. And so inclusivity becomes a major issue. And actually, if we go back like 2 slides, I think we've got no. So inclusivity is really important. Safety is also important. People have to feel safe, and if you're at a game store and you're trying to play a game and somebody's screaming and yelling and kind of making a scene and making it really difficult for you to have a good time, that affects everybody else in that area. Yeah. So when we talk about triggers, and we know what the trigger is here, the trigger is playing this type of game in which there is some sort of co-op strategy that other people aren't following. The goal here is not to stop the person from having the meltdown once they've already started, because that's going to play itself out. Meltdowns for folks on the spectrum, off the spectrum, whatever, they're like hurricanes. You can tape the windows, but you can't stop the thing from happening. It's just going to go. Yeah. We got to get in beforehand. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in the situation. So maybe he was sitting down talking to that person and saying, hey, these games aren't working out. I know about this game, though, which you might really like, that is less cooperative and perhaps more competitive, or perhaps doesn't involve on my strategy having anything to do with anybody else's. I can think about the semi-competitive like Marvel games, the card games, things like that.
Oh, like Marvel Legendary or something like that, sure.
Yeah. Things like that. So it's about, and knowing that, hey, if you sit down and play this game, we've had this conversation. You're having this meltdown over and over again. People aren't going to want to play with you anymore, and then you're not going to have games to play. So let's find ways around that. So what do you do in your game?
Yeah, I mean, before we dive definitely deep in, because we're going to talk a lot about strategies that stretch from role-playing to board game. So when we talked about a lot of the examples that, everybody gave, we're just going to highlight a couple of others, but then we're going to talk in a little bit more focus about the game store environment itself. So here's a couple things. One, the speed when people decide what they want to do. If I know what I want to do and that other person is just taking forever, dealing with someone, the backseat player that they call it, or the expert, whatever, you use for that. When we talk about the way that you run your game, that's one source of potential triggers because it doesn't agree with the way that person's approaching it. But also just briefly, let's look about the game store and the environment itself. The physical environment, I've been to game stores that have tons of carpet all over the place. I've also been to large game stores that are hardwood floors. Is there a difference between those two environments? You bet there is. Now, what if you're a person that has a noise sensitivity issue? That echo and that loudness bothers you. High ceilings versus low ceilings, what the lighting looks like, what the temperature is it near a busy highway? All of these parts of the environment, again, you may not be thinking consciously that these are problems, but if we analyze where these are coming from, where the behavior is coming from, what the trigger is, we can try, if we can, to put something in play. Take a couple more, or just some other examples from game nights?
I feel like actually you covered that really well.
Yeah.
The physical environment makes a big difference. It's all about having an understanding of comfort. It's different for every player.
Yes.
So there's keeping it in mind, keeping it as something that you can talk about, that you can address is great. But because it's going to be different for every player, it also means that everybody's going to come in with their own challenges towards it. So just being aware that the physical environment may play a role is very helpful.
And that's even if, for some people, the hardwood floor is a bad thing. For some people, carpet may be a bad thing. And it really is like, you might not be able to solve everybody's issues with the environment, but understanding it might let you have more compassion. If you're seeing someone who has a little more trouble engaging at the game table, and they have trouble with noisy environments and it's a hardwood floor, then you can have some compassion for how you want to facilitate that experience when someone is responding to something.
So this slide here is, we all know how gaming can help. We've all experienced the benefit of gaming in our lives. Gaming has a wealth of opportunities. So we actually want to seek the use of gaming And one of the big avenues, the reason I have this slide up here is actually this is a photo of one of the regular monthly game groups that we run. And this is a photo from a game store called 6 Feet Under Games in New Holland, PA. The reason I highlight this specifically, and actually the proprietors are right here, Sue and Rich. The reason I highlight this is that a lot of times we had run board game groups in a very insular fashion for everybody. We had run game groups where it was, we go to their regular meet-up place and it's the same like 15 to 20 people. And through talking with the folks who run the organization and some of the parents, we wanted to kind of up it a little bit. And go, well, let's go to an environment that has a little bit more challenges. So now we're actually maybe exposing people to more triggers or exposing a person to more situations than what they've dealt with before, which actually might help engage people with, like, now we have a lot more adults that we've never met or a lot more people, so we're role modeling or mirroring behaviors. And the reason that I kind of mention this, because again, we're not going to train everybody on why gaming is helpful and beneficial. We all know that.
That's the last panel.
That was the last panel, and that's kind of one of the reasons why we're all here. We believe in the power of gaming. But some recipes for success, okay? First and foremost, be consistent. If there's a rule, everyone needs to follow the rule. So part of this is discussing rules and expectations before we play.
And that comes down to the rules of the game store, which should be clearly posted, and everyone should know what they are, and they're enforced whether this is the regular customer who lives there and is there every single day, or the guy who just came in for the first time today.
Right.
Through to the rules of the game that you're playing at that given time. Like, it's got to remain consistent, and for every one of us, consistency is very helpful. It's a calming, it is a good place for all of us to be.
Also, something that was brought up earlier today in one of the other panels, that I think it was the one that you were in earlier this morning. They talked about session 0. The idea, like that first meetup, you're not actually playing the game. You guys are actually sitting down and discussing what kind of game you're going to play. Yeah. Are there things that at the table you guys don't want to talk about? Are there situations that are like kind of taboo, or like just those opening things to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as what the players want to get out of the game, as well as, the kind of story that you're looking to tell. As long as everybody's on the same page, it can proceed very successfully, but make sure that you have those honest conversations in the beginning of it.
And somebody mentioned that when you're playing a game and it seems like the other person is playing a completely different game. If I come into the D&D session expecting a tactical fighting game and somebody else is expecting a gritty film noir kind of thing, it's not going to work out well for us. So we need to make those expectations clear really early on.
Because setting those expectations and, as we go through here, identifying whatever that difficulty or challenge is as early as we can. Jared mentioned you can't really calm someone down necessarily when they're in the middle of meltdown. You're already there. You're at the top of the road. The car's already started going down the slope on the roller coaster. You're not going to put the quick brakes on that. So the earlier we can identify, and this again is part of partnering and learning each other and talking with each other, being compassionate. Compassion isn't just, compassion is understanding someone else's frame of reference and understanding that people, to go to the last point before we talk about some of the other strategies, don't assume that someone's difficulty is autism spectrum disorder. That's not a good way to start a conversation.
Even if
bad autism day. What?
Even if the person has autism, everybody's got bad days.
Oh, yeah.
You woke up and your car wouldn't start and your coffee maker ran out of coffee. And
Are you
your
writing a
shoelace
country
broke.
and western song?
I am, really, absolutely. No, not at all. But that's, all those things go wrong, and then someone says the wrong thing to you and you explode because all that's been stacking up all day. Has nothing to do with disability.
Okay.
Do you want to take questions?
Yeah.
Yeah, we covered a couple of these other, little points. In general, we kind of refer back to, of course, 80s, Bill and Ted, be excellent to each other. But, it really is about trying to ask questions, not being intrusive. But these are kind of some general considerations. Are there any questions specifically from everybody out in the audience? We got about a good 7 to 10 minutes or so. No, it's, I know a lot of folks have kind of just been speaking here and there. Go ahead.
I have a question not specific to autism, but just to sort of like conventions and accommodations and disability in general.
Sure.
So I'm wondering what could be done at different cons to kind of brings sort of different things. So like one thing that I would benefit from, for instance, is like captioning. That's never available at PAX, and like what can we do to make overall like cons more accessible?
So, I don't know that this would necessarily solve the caption portion, but one thing that I worked with Jack and Jen to develop for our convention, Save Against Fear, is one of the things that I noticed a lot when you go to conventions, especially free-to-play areas, when there's like stacks and stacks of games, and you don't want to play any of the games that you don't know. Right? Like, because you don't want to spend time with rules. One of the ways that we've tried to be more inclusive is we created a customer service model where we have volunteers that have been trained on how to, or have played those games and are familiar with them, that can actually go with the people, help them set up, run them through the first couple of turns, and make that more comfortable for them to play through. When you talk about captioning, do you mean for...
Well, it's kind of like universal design, essentially. Like,
Yeah.
a bunch of people would benefit from it, but, like, I feel like in general, at a lot of different conventions, there's just not ways to make, like, panels and sometimes even gaming accessible. So there's, like, high-top tables right in the middle area, and the game that I want to be playing isn't necessarily accessible to me if I can't stand for long periods of time, or...
Yeah, I think a lot of the concerns in the area, like if we're talking about any kind of like technological assistance in the form of like captioning and things like that, unfortunately, and again, this is an explanation, not an excuse, for any kind of environment, a lot of it is financial, for one, is a lot of the technology to keep it as ever-present as we would love it to be. It's not cost effective, or it's cost prohibitive, I guess I should say. Well, to some degree. I mean,
Sure.
if you know about other tech,
it
go
comes
ahead.
down to advocacy. It starts with making people aware this is something that's going on, because people have the best intentions in the world. Those that are differently abled, it's very difficult for people without that disability to think through what it would be like to have that if you don't live that every day. My younger brother's in a wheelchair, and I'm constantly looking at buildings and going, yeah, you've got a ramp, but it's 8 miles away on the other side of the building, and he's got to go through 4 hallways to get where he needs to go. So it's there, but not helpful. So I think it comes down to advocacy, and it comes down for all of us, depending on where we are in the world and what's going on, to be able to say, advocate for this person's right to be able to be part of this. And so if it's captioning, if it is having sign language interpretation, if it's having, whatever else those things might be, it's getting in touch with the people who run those conventions and saying, I would really need this to be able to fully enjoy. What can you do to help me out? And then making sure there are resources available.
There are two things that are worthwhile to mention in this particular space. The first is all the PAXs have medical badges that are available that can help you get into panels early. If you need seat positioning, if you need mobility assistance, that can be a really great way to do that. They are all really, really accommodating to those medical badges. And if you have even just hard of hearing or something along those lines and need to make sure you're sitting on the correct side of the panel, that can go a long way. The other thing that's worthwhile to mention, in the back of the room, raising his hand really high, is Hawk Robinson.
Hi, Hawk.
Hawk Robinson runs RPGresearch.com and RPG Therapeutics, and has done a lot of work with RPGs and with the gaming community around accessibility, and is a great resource to talk to about what kinds of equipment, what kinds of things are out there to help make gaming spaces and gaming in general more accessible. Oh, and then tomorrow there's another panel. You're on that panel.
I'm on that panel.
What's the panel about?
Talking about accessibility, Adam's very tired.
I believe the preferred nomenclature is sleep deprived.
I think we have time for like one more question.
This gentleman right there has been like trying to, in different manners.
So
go right ahead.
Go.
So I also run a group of 16 people at a local gaming shop. And not to diagnose, but some of them get very bored. And then it comes to their turn and they need a recap. So like, how can I keep them engaged?
Smaller groups.
Well, one of the things that we've done with large groups is we have co-GMs. So like you could still be in charge of the campaign and running it, but then you have someone, even if it's another player, that's like, we're gonna help take this group of 5 people, maybe they're going to explore that area. So they take them to a separate table, they do their adventure, you come back, join the group, and then that way everyone's engaged at the same time.
Another thing that gives people attention and agency that Jack and I do with our group is we will give the person whose turn it is in the initiative order. We'll say like, okay, you're up, but then you're going next and you're after him. So the next like 2 or 3 people have that like, oh, okay, I'm gonna be up soon. I have to figure out what I'm doing. And it makes them pay attention more to what's going on. And then after 2 people have gone, then it's, okay, you're up after him and then you're up after him. And if you keep that on deck circle kind of functioning throughout the thing, it makes everybody still pay attention. And now you're trying to facilitate what they're doing between like maybe 10 people's turns as opposed to 15 people's turns.
Yeah. And something that was brought up on the last panel, Megan, I believe, was talking about having her players go in pairs. So you're this duo, you're that duo, you're that duo. So everyone's communicating with somebody else to figure out how they as a group are going to work with what happened previously. And at least that cuts that from 16 turns down into 8, which halves the combat time.
I was just going to plug the panel tomorrow that's about accessibility is called Bringing Others to the Table. It's at 10:30 tomorrow, and totally worthwhile to check out if you have thoughts or concerns about making your table more accessible and what that looks like.
So we've got to wrap up. We got the high sign from the back that's going up and down. Says
We got
time.
the flashlight, the 2-minute warning.
We will all be available to talk some more and answer more questions outside after the panel's over. We have literature. We have funky colored wristbands. We have all kinds of things for you.
And if the persons who had asked the questions during the panel are contributed kind of coming up, we usually do some kind of special thank yous for folks who help us keep it lively. Those of you, of course, who have already attended Save Against Fear probably already have what we're going to give you, so it's totally okay.
No ducks.
I have 1 duck.
She has
one
a
duck.
duck.
One nerdy duck.
I
But
stuffed dice bags.
Guys, thank you very much. Be excellent to each other. Enjoy the rest of PAX.